here's something that makes absolutely no sense. Canada has a river system that drains nearly a fifth of the entire country. 1.8 million square kilometers flowing through some of the most resource-rich territory on the continent, longer than the distance from New York to Los Angeles, ending at one of the most strategically important coastlines on Earth. And yet, the total population living along its entire length is less than a single neighborhood in Toronto. Let that sink in. A river system larger than Iran, draining more territory than Alaska. And Canada has built almost nothing around it. No major ports, no integrated transportation network, no national strategy treating it like the geographic asset it actually is. It's like owning a natural highway straight to the Arctic and choosing to walk around it instead. And it gets stranger. This isn't a developing country struggling with limited resources. This is Canada, a G7 nation, a country that spent billions engineering the St. Lawrence Seaway. That drove transcontinental railways across mountain ranges and shield rock. Canada knows how to build corridors. It just chose not to build this one. So why? Why does Canada's most powerful river flow north, mostly in silence, while the world is waking up to exactly what it connects? This is the story of the Mackenzie River, Canada's most overlooked geographic asset, and why, in the decade ahead, ignoring it may become one of the most consequential strategic miscalculations a wealthy country has ever made. To understand why the Mackenzie matters, you first have to understand what it actually is. Because most people, including most Canadians, have genuinely never thought about it. The Mackenzie runs about 1,800 kilometers from Great Slave Lake to the Beaufort Sea, the longest river flowing entirely within Canadian borders. But the full system is much larger. Add the Peace River, the Athabasca, the Liard, and you're looking at roughly 4,241 kilometers of connected waterways stretching from the Rocky Mountains all the way to the Arctic coast. Its watershed covers approximately 1.8 million square kilometers, about 20% of Canada's total land area, larger than Iran, bigger than Alaska, roughly the size of Mexico. The Amazon drains 7 million square kilometers. The Mississippi drains 3.2 million. The Mackenzie at 1.8 million is playing in the same league as river systems that built civilizations. In most countries, a river like this becomes the economic spine of a region. Cities grow along its banks. Industrial ports develop at its mouth. But the Mackenzie doesn't work that way. The largest community on the main stem is Inuvik, with roughly 3,200 people. Fort Simpson has about 1,200. Norman Wells sits under 1,000. Add up every settlement along the entire course from Great Slave Lake to the Beaufort Sea, and you're probably looking at fewer than 10,000 people total, less than a small suburb in Vancouver. For a river this size in a wealthy G7 country, that's not just unusual. It's almost unprecedented anywhere in the developed world. No major cities, no industrial ports, no deep water facilities, no grain terminals like you see on the Mississippi. Just a handful of remote communities connected by seasonal roads, air links, and the river itself, when it isn't frozen solid for 6 months of the year. So here's the question that doesn't get asked nearly enough. Why did Canada, a country that clearly knows how to build infrastructure, choose not to build around the most powerful river it has? Here's the answer. Canada didn't forget how to develop rivers. It just built in the opposite direction. Roughly 75% of Canadians live within about 160 kilometers of the U.S. border. The economic core is southern. The highways, railways, pipelines, refineries, and deep water ports all run along that narrow east-west corridor, hugging the American border. Think about the St. Lawrence Seaway, opened in 1959. Canada and the United States spent billions connecting the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. Today it handles 35 to 40 million tons of cargo annually. Canada invested heavily in that corridor because it connected resources to warm water ports and global markets. It made immediate economic sense. But the Mackenzie? Almost nothing comparable. And here's the critical point. This wasn't an accident. It was a choice. The Arctic was frozen. The markets were south. The Mackenzie stayed quiet because there was no compelling reason to develop it. But here's what changed. The Arctic isn't frozen the way it used to be. And when the Arctic becomes accessible, the Mackenzie stops being a remote northern river. It becomes something else entirely. Let's talk about what the Mackenzie Basin actually sits on. Because this isn't just about water. Start with hydrocarbons. The Peace Athabasca subbasin drains northern Alberta, including the Athabasca oil sands, one of the world's largest hydrocarbon accumulations, with widely cited recoverable reserves of around 166 billion barrels of oil. Nearly all of it drains toward the Mackenzie system. The Mackenzie Delta itself sits atop significant natural gas deposits. The Mackenzie Gas Project, a $16.2 billion proposal backed by Imperial Oil, ConocoPhillips, Shell, and ExxonMobil, received regulatory approval in 2011. Then the U.S. shale boom killed the economics and it was shelved in 2017. But the gas didn't disappear. The resource is still there. Now, add critical minerals. The Northwest Territories hold major deposits of gold, diamonds, tungsten, and rare earth elements, materials essential for batteries, semiconductors, and defense systems. The territory is already one of Canada's leading diamond producers, but moving heavy ore out of remote sites is extraordinarily expensive when your options are seasonal ice roads that exist for a matter of weeks, or air freight that costs more per ton than almost any other transport method on Earth. So, the Mackenzie doesn't just drain water. It drains hydrocarbons, critical minerals, and future strategic value into a single corridor. In most countries, that combination becomes the backbone of industrial civilization. That's what the Mississippi does for the United States. That's what the Rhine does for Central Europe. But the Mackenzie has one critical difference from both of them. Its outlet isn't the Gulf of Mexico or the North Sea. It's the Arctic Ocean. And for most of modern history, that wasn't a highway. It was a wall. That's changing faster than most people realize. In the 1980s, Arctic summer sea ice covered approximately 7 million square kilometers. By the early 2020s, that number had shrunk to around 4 million. Multiple research groups project essentially ice-free Arctic summers by the 2030s or 2040s. That's not a distant horizon. That's within the operational lifespan of infrastructure being designed today. And as the ice retreats, the math on global shipping changes completely. The Northwest Passage through Canada's Arctic archipelago can cut shipping distances between Europe and Asia dramatically compared to routes through the Suez Canal. But here's where this stops being a shipping story and becomes a geopolitical one. Russia is not experimenting in the Arctic. It's building new ports along its northern coast. Arctic military bases expanded or reopened after lying dormant since the Soviet era. A growing nuclear-powered icebreaker fleet larger than any other country on Earth. Russia is treating its Arctic coastline as a national strategic project. China has no Arctic coastline whatsoever, yet it officially designates itself a near-Arctic state. It has commissioned icebreakers, funded polar research stations, and invested heavily in what it calls the Polar Silk Road across Iceland, Greenland, and Northern Europe. The logic is transparent. If the Arctic becomes a major trade corridor, this century, China wants influence over it before the architecture is set. The United States, after years of complacency, is paying attention again. New icebreakers are being funded. Arctic military exercises are expanding. The Pentagon is publishing Arctic strategies. And Canada has something none of these countries can replicate. A natural continental corridor from the resource-rich interior directly to the western entrance of the Northwest Passage. The Mackenzie doesn't just drain water to the sea, it creates a navigable pathway from the boreal heartland of the continent to the most strategically significant coastline in the emerging Arctic economy. No Russian port has that connection to a continental interior. No Chinese investment can manufacture it. The corridor exists in Canada, it exists nowhere else. But geography alone doesn't win anything. And here's where Canada's story gets complicated. Because throughout the 20th century, there were multiple ambitious attempts to develop the Mackenzie Corridor. Almost all of them failed. The most dramatic came during World War II, the Canal Project. American military planners, terrified of losing Pacific supply lines after Pearl Harbor, launched an emergency project to pipe oil from Norman Wells on the Mackenzie River to Whitehorse in Yukon. Over 25,000 workers, roughly $134 million in 1940s dollars. Completed in 1944, it operated for about 13 months, then it was shut down. The strategic emergency had passed. Equipment was abandoned in the wilderness. Some of it is still there, rusting. a monument to the gap between urgency and operational reality. Then, the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline Inquiry in the 1970s, a proposal to move Arctic gas south to North American markets. Justice Thomas Berger held hearings across the North. Indigenous communities raised fundamental concerns about land rights and environmental impacts. In 1977, Berger recommended a 10-year moratorium to settle land claims first. The pipeline was never built, and while the inquiry became a landmark moment for Indigenous rights in Canada, it also froze large-scale infrastructure development in the corridor for a generation. Then the Mackenzie Gas Project in the 2000s. Years of review, regulatory approval in 2011. Then the U.S. shale revolution. Prices collapsed. Shelved indefinitely in 2017. 3 major attempts across 8 decades. 3 failures, each for different reasons. And each left behind more institutional skepticism, more regulatory caution, more political reluctance to commit to the North. The barriers are real, and they haven't disappeared. The Mackenzie freezes for 6 to 7 months every year. Permafrost means roads crack and foundations heave. The Inuvik-Tuktoyaktuk Highway, 140 kilometers of all-weather road, completed in 2017, cost roughly $300 million. Over $2 million per kilometer, often described as around 10 times the cost of an equivalent southern highway. 10 times. Let that sink in. Construction seasons are 3 to 4 months in a good year. Labor has to be flown in. Materials travel enormous distances. And for most of Canada's history, it was simply cheaper to send resources south into existing American infrastructure. The North stayed optional because the alternatives were faster and more reliable. But here's what's different now. The cost of staying passive has risen sharply. Canada claims the Northwest Passage as internal Canadian waters. The United States and others argue it should be an international strait, open to free passage under maritime law. That legal debate isn't resolved by diplomatic statements. It's strengthened or weakened by operational reality, by what Canada can actually do in those waters, by monitoring, search and rescue capability, consistent operations that demonstrate effective governance of territory you claim to control. Right now, that capacity is limited. Tuktoyaktuk has about 900 people. Year-round road access to the Arctic coast only arrived in 2017. Before that, the coast was reachable only by seasonal ice road or aircraft. Compare that to Russia, which has multiple cities above the Arctic Circle with populations over 100,000. Murmansk alone has around 300,000 people. Russia operates year-round ports, military bases, and industrial infrastructure across its Arctic coastline as a long-standing fact of deliberate investment built over decades. You cannot respond quickly to emergencies if your staging points are tiny communities connected by seasonal roads. You cannot enforce sovereignty if your ability to project capability into your own claimed waters is constrained by infrastructure that doesn't yet exist. Canada already possesses the geographic corridor that other countries are spending billions trying to access. But without ports, roads, fuel depots, and sustained investment, it remains what it's always been, a natural advantage that hasn't been converted into operational reality. And the economic case has shifted just as dramatically. Global demand for critical minerals is accelerating. Electric vehicles, renewable energy, advanced manufacturing all require lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earths. China dominates global supply chains for most of these. Western countries are scrambling urgently to develop alternatives that don't flow through Beijing. The Northwest Territories has significant deposits of exactly these materials. Reliable year-round infrastructure through the Mackenzie Corridor would make currently marginal projects commercially viable overnight. Then there's LNG. Europe remains desperate to reduce dependence on Russian supply. Japan and South Korea are enormous and growing importers. Canada has vast natural gas reserves but limited export capacity. An Arctic LNG facility on the Beaufort Sea coast, served by Mackenzie Delta deposits, could reach both Atlantic and Pacific markets, exploiting a geographic position no other LNG exporter on Earth can replicate. And if the Northwest Passage becomes a regular commercial shipping route over the next 2 decades, vessels will need refueling, resupply, and emergency services somewhere along the Canadian Arctic coast. Right now, there's almost nothing. A developed port in the Mackenzie Delta region could become the critical service hub for an entire Arctic shipping economy, capturing value from every vessel that transits the passage regardless of cargo. So let's come back to where we started. Why doesn't Canada use the most powerful river it has? Because for most of its history, it didn't need to. The Arctic was frozen, the markets were south. The Mackenzie was a geographic fact without a strategic purpose. But that era is over. Russia is hardening its Arctic position. China is acquiring influence across the circumpolar north. Critical minerals, Arctic shipping, LNG, and renewable energy are all converging on the same geography the Mackenzie River drains. Canada controls roughly 20% of the world's fresh water. It has the third largest oil reserves on Earth. It sits on vast deposits of the critical minerals the global economy urgently needs outside Chinese control. And it has a natural corridor connecting all of that directly to the Arctic Ocean. Most countries would build entire national strategies around a combination like that. Canada built highways to the US border instead. The calculation in the 21st century is different, because the barriers disappeared. Ice, permafrost, distance, and cost are still brutally real, but because the cost of inaction is rising with every year that passes. Because sovereignty not demonstrated tends to erode. Because corridors that other powers can surround become corridors that Canada no longer fully controls on its own terms. The Mackenzie River flows north, whether Canada pays attention or not. It drains one of the most resource-rich basins on the continent into one of the most strategically important coastlines on Earth. It's been doing that for 10,000 years. The only question is what Canada chooses to build alongside it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Is Canada finally waking up to what the Mackenzie represents? Or will this be another generation of almost developing the corridor that geography handed it for free? Because the answer to that question will define what kind of Arctic nation Canada actually is. Not in principle, in practice.